This is the reconvening of the council meeting, the public hearing from the previous evening. Now we are still in the committee of the whole, so we can simply continue on. Clerk, do you need to call out the actual issue and the summary of correspondence received? Okay.
This is a reconvened special meeting of council for the purpose of holding a public hearing. Mayor Sullivan in the chair. Councillor Anton, Councillor Ball, Councillor Cadman is ineligible to participate this evening. Councillor Capri, Councillor Chow, Councillor Deal, Councillor Ladner, Councillor Lee, and both Councillors Louie and Stevenson are ineligible to participate this evening. And I'll now read the additional correspondence received. We have received 2 additional letters in opposition for a total of 214 letters received in opposition since referral. We have received 1 additional letter in support for a total of 3 letters received in support since referral.
Okay, we're going to continue on the speakers list, and I'll just remind people they have 5 minutes to speak. They can speak as long as they want, in fact, but the first time to speak is for 5 minutes only. And if you do want to speak further, please indicate that to me, and we'll put your name at the end of the list to continue your presentation. The next speaker we have is Ken Seathram, followed by Laura Eaton.
Your Worship, City Councillors, is this mic active?
Yes.
City Councillors, Ken Seathram, I live on 1080 Wolf in Shaughnessy, and I, like the vast majority of area residents, am speaking against the proposal for rezoning. One of the most remarkable aspects of Shaughnessy is its progressive garden city style of design, which achieves an old world residential park in the midst of this great city. The zoning of this area has been preserved for the last 100 years. As you know, Shaughnessy was named in honor of CPR President Sir Thomas Shaughnessy. 100 years ago, in 1907, Richard Marple, who was the superintendent of CPR, announced that the company planned to create a suburb for Vancouver's residents. The CPR retained a very famous landscape architect named Frederick Todd, and Todd is considered today Canada's first and premier landscape architect. He dedicated his life to what he referred to as the public and private works of beautification and utility, with nature herself as a partner. The first lots went on sale in 1909, and Vancouver lined up, as you can see in this picture, for the chance to purchase land. That's not too dissimilar than what we see today. Slide 2 shows a park that was designed by Frederick Todd, Mount Royal Park, which is a famous park in Montreal. And slide 3 is an actual picture of the man himself, Mr. Frederick Todd. The design of Shaughnessy Heights reflects Todd's enthusiasm for what he called the garden city concept of urban landscaping. And this was that homes were surrounded by hedgerows and broad lawns. Tree-lined boulevards followed the contours of local terrain, ascending up to the crescent where it all culminated. The limits of the garden city were divided by hedges, gardens, stone walls, and property itself. Todd designed Shaughnessy to be set off in this style. In the summer of 1909, 1,200 workers began to cut roads, build sidewalks, and lay sewer lines in this large property. This is a picture of such workers that toiled in the heights of Shaughnessy. One very important element of shaping Shaughnessy was that the creators of the area wanted to enshrine Todd's concepts of the garden city into law. The CPR took very major steps to assure that the provincial legislature would control local zoning regulations rather than the municipality of Point Grey, which did at the time. In 1911, the BC legislature passed the first local zoning law, followed in 1922 by the Shaughnessy Heights Building Restriction Act, which prohibited the division of single-family dwellings into apartments or housekeeping rooms. Again, 2 laws designed to ensure that the municipality of the time would preserve the zoning of Todd's Garden City. The favorite architects of the period were McRae and Fox, designers of the classic Tudor Revival home, such as the Nickel House pictured here in slide 5. The Nickel House was built by Sam McClure. It was built for Walter Nickel, but predominantly occupied by Antoinette and Leopold Bentley, who escaped from Nazi-occupied Austria into Canada in 1938 and spent their lives in this house. As a quick aside, I want to tell you that McClure believed that a well-designed home and a well-balanced property were the key to a loving family. He very often, secretly placed a heart somewhere in the house, either in the construction, the foundation, the chimney, and he believed that home was truly where the heart was. We live in a McClure house, and my wife and daughter and I haven't found the heart of the McClure house yet, but we feel McClure's presence every single day. I don't know if the developer has yet found the heart in the Nichols house. The last slide is about the Gateway. These stories about Vancouver are really important to our civic culture. The intersection of Granville and 16th is a very sentinel place in this city. It represents a transition point between past and between present. The intersection is recognizable to anyone who has ever lived or visited Vancouver. Single-family homes, again surrounded by hedgerows, broad lawns, tree-lined boulevards that follow the terrain of the contours of the terrain. Todd designed it this way. McClure positioned the Nichols house that way. When you first come into Vancouver, as you travel down Granville, you pass through this very historic part of Vancouver, and all of a sudden at 16th, it changes, and the doors to the western frontier open up. You see the shops of Granville rise, the Granville Street Bridge beyond, downtown in the mountains. And it's a very stunning transition. And when you leave downtown, it's the same thing. You take all the energy and bustle of Fairview and the downtown core, and it's replaced by this quiet and calm serenity of Shaughnessy. No tourist or resident is ever left untouched by this amazing contrast in neighborhoods, and it begins and ends all at 16th and Granville. The ancestors of this city sought to create a garden city suburb, and many people gave their hearts, their minds, and their lives to this task. In fact, over the last 100 years, citizens have spent their energy creating a neighborhood, setting the standards, and preserving the design that they believed in. The Shaughnessy neighborhood, created by Vancouver's founders, is a symbol of a city's true ability to have its neighborhood so distinctly set off, and is really an untenable asset in most major cities in the world.
Please summarize now.
Thank you. Well, I understand the developer's interest. The greater harm is in destroying a historic past, destroying the neighborhood's distinct design, and undoing the work of a century of labor by citizens to keep the neighborhood zoned the way the CPR and Frederick Todd and the builders of the time designed it to be. The city needs to draw on this past, keep a strong vision for the future, and I hope the city will be able to see that rezoning would not only hurt the corner of 16th and Granville, but the cornerstone of the city. Thank you for your time.
You have two questions. Councillor Deal?
Yes, thanks very much. I was actually quite interested in your discussion of landscape architecture, and I'm looking at an air photo, and it strikes me that there are very few lots that have that large treed area at the back of them. Was that designed to, I mean, it clearly has not been landscape architected right now. I think it's not landscaped, it's what's grown there, but was it intended to be part of a formal garden that belonged to that house, or was it intended to be another lot with its own garden?
According to my readings, McClure and Fox positioned the house kind of set back off the crescent with a rose garden in the front and a large unsculpted property in the back for the purpose of balancing the diplomacy of the rose garden with a slightly less mature garden in the back.
Were there other lots? Because like I say, I'm looking at the current air photo, the 2006 air photo, and I'm not seeing a lot of other lots that have that back space that's left wooded. That just strikes me as odd that there would only be one. So I thought maybe with your historical knowledge you'd know. You know, I'm not a professional on landscape architecture. Okay. You could come to my lot and visit the thicket in the back that needs trimming. But look at my.
Okay. Councillor Capri?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks very much for that presentation. I wasn't familiar with the heart of the house story, and that was very heartwarming to hear. Given that, what are your thoughts about the potential loss of the Heritage House? Should we not approve this application?
You know, it would be sad. I live in a heritage home too. I would hate to see it destroyed. I think McClure and Todd and the people of the time would rather see the house destroyed and its heart ripped out rather than rezoning an area that was designed for a purpose. And I think that puts the citizens' needs ahead of the needs of business.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Laura Eaton. Eaton.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council members. Thank you for your time. My name is Paul Singh, and I'm legal counsel for Miss Laura Eaton, who is a long-term homeowner and resident at 1398 The Crescent, which is just a few doors down from the Nichols House. Unfortunately, Miss Eaton is out of the country and is unavailable to attend today, and she has asked that I speak on her behalf so she has a voice at this hearing. Miss Eaton is strongly opposed to this development for a number of reasons, all of which have been touched upon by Mr. Ray Spaxman and others, including Mr. Seatham today. and which I will briefly summarize on her behalf. First of all, 16 townhouses are not required to adequately compensate the developer, as the independent consultant BTY Group's report has shown, especially considering the significant increase in land value of the nickel property over the last several years. And since about 90% of the neighborhood is opposed to the development, as found on the Vote McRae website, Ms. Eaton believes that other alternatives should be looked at which are fair to both the developer and to the citizens and to the neighbors. Second, Shaughnessy's official development plan wants to preserve Shaughnessy's unique pre-1940s character, and the form of the development with a continuous row of townhouses with no variety in height, setback, or character is not in line with the ODP's vision. Also, the ODP encourages single-family residences, and a townhouse complex is not in line with that as well. Third, there's going to be a lot of unnecessary destruction of trees and vegetation, which under the ODP should be preserved, and the city hasn't provided Ms. Eaton or other citizens with any useful information on the long-term environmental impact of this to date. And fourthly, for such a significant development proposal, Ms. Eaton does not believe that there was enough public consultation. Ms. Eaton, who is an immediate neighbor of the Nickel House, was never notified of or invited to any of the co-design meetings. She was only notified of one open house meeting and was not asked or encouraged to provide input into the process. Ms. Eaton is also concerned with the precedent that this development will set for Shaughnessy, and is concerned that the development will result in more rezoning, more townhouses, and more condos in the future, which will destroy the history, architecture, and landscape of First Shaughnessy. And finally, Ms. Eaton is aware of and not opposed to the eco-density initiative and the need to reduce commuter traffic and traffic to the city center. But with the proposed construction and use of a 51-car parkade, it's clear that this development is about densification and not about eco-densification. And so the eco-density initiative should not be used as a rationale to accept this development. And subject to any question, those are my comments. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Chow.
I miss your opening remark about the owner. How long has she been the owner of her house?
I believe
She's
several years.
7 years?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Or several years, I'm sorry.
Several years, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eric Cohen, followed by Kirsten Strand.
Bishop, councillors, my name is Eric Cohen, and I live at 6120 McDonald Street in a strata housing development that was done a number of years ago by Brian Bell, Arthur Bell Holdings in Kerrisdale. The development is a beautiful development. My house originally sat on the entire 1 2/3 acre site. It has gardens that were planted by the UBC botany class, the graduate class of 1929, and most of the garden is still intact. The main house has been designated by the City of Vancouver and will now remain as an example for many more generations to admire and appreciate. The project is a model of what can be done with larger lots. The heritage house is preserved with 5 other homes, smaller homes, in a tasteful, complementary way, fill the balance of this large lot. At the time when this project was proposed, there were many neighbors, and one in particular, who stirred up the pot and got a whole group together. Many claimed that this was the end of the lifestyle that they had grown accustomed to, that values in the neighborhood would drop. This would be the ruin. This would be a terrible use of property, and this would be widespread, and it would continue throughout Kerrisdale and destroy what they had longed to preserve. Now, does this all sound very familiar tonight? They would have preferred that the heritage house be torn down and have the developer build 3 large houses on his 3 legal lots. And this, to me, is just a copy of, it's just a repeat. This development currently proposed by Arthur Bell Holdings is a premium lot in Shaughnessy. We all know that. It's in an area of Highcroft, the Nicola House, the Circle. It's choice for Vancouver. It's as good as it gets. It's the pièce de résistance of Vancouver. I hate to use the word, but I guess it's being overused, and I wasn't going to use it, but I'm going to use it. The greening of Vancouver will only be accomplished by saving heritage homes at all cost. There is nothing greener than a heritage house. This particular house is premium, the best of the best. It should be designated, rehabilitated, and preserved for generations to come. And Arthur Bell Holdings should be given major incentives to encourage the restoration and rehabilitation of this building. This is an important Vancouver landmark. How better could it be to have this home in its natural setting, with this rose garden, its 19th century rose garden in front, preserved for the people of Vancouver to see, to drive through the Circle and see where the Gilded live. But having its backyard, its adjoining property becoming part of the 21st century, where 16 families, as opposed to 3, could live. I know there are always people who will object to progress. Change is always very difficult. The city of Vancouver, like the rest of the planet, is a very important juncture, a turning point, where difficult decisions must be made to preserve our resources. This project proposed has all the ingredients of green. It has a very capable developer, a developer with integrity, who can take on the difficult challenges that this project presents. Please, Council, approve this project. You will not be disappointed.
Thank you very much. Kirsten Strand. Terry Condio, sorry. Terry Condio.
Hi, I'm not Kirsten Strand, as you can notice, but I'll be speaking on her behalf, so I won't be as eloquent as her probably, but I'll try my best. My name is Kirsten Strand, and I reside at Greencroft, located at 3838 Cypress Street. Other speakers have provided you with a synopsis of why the current McRae development would have a serious negative impact on not only Shaughnessy residents, but also on all Vancouverites. I view the McRae property as the gateway to Shaughnessy. This corner lot is in fact the entranceway to what is considered to be the most prestigious area of First Shaughnessy, the Crescent. Like the majority of Shaughnessy residents, I believe that rezoning from FSD, First Shaughnessy District, to CD1 is an egregious mistake. Poorly designed row housing would not only be a visual assault, but would also set a precedent for further densification in this district. I wanted to take a few moments to share with you my personal involvement in the Greencroft project and how we should remember some of the recent lessons learned. To further clarify, Greg and I own the Heritage A residence. There were 2 other parties involved as owners of the Greencroft infills. Throughout our development process, both the city and the ownership group received significant input from our neighbors. In May of 2000, we held an open house at the Greencroft residence. Based on the feedback from neighbors and interested parties, the initial Greencroft proposal of 4 infill cottages was modified to 2 infill cottages. This decrease in density occurred in the proposal stage, even prior to the actual 3 city hearings specially related to Greencroft. Further adjustments were made in the overall design of the Greencroft estate, which actually improved the project. This included moving our driveway from the Matthew Street entrance to Cypress Street. I mention this as at Greencroft we had a considerable higher degree of participation and involvement from neighbors than has the McRae project. I believe that this process is much needed to correct significant design flaws as well as create the type of development that will surpass the needs of Shaughnessy residents, the City of Vancouver, and the community at large. On March 1st, 2005, Ray Spaxman wrote a report on the outcome of the Greencroft development project. Greg and I completely agree with his report recommendations. These include his comments about the infill located on Matthew Street, south of the Heritage residence. I quote, "The southern infill is the major disappointment in this development. It intrudes into the front set back areas along Matthews, conflicting with the design guidelines that refer to maintaining the front garden character of Shaughnessy." While some have argued that the guidelines support variety, the infill is too strong an architectural element. As a consequence, this infill intrudes both of the front yard pattern of Matthews and on the strong symmetry of the southern facade of the Heritage House. You may ask, what does this have to do with the McRae proposal? I am here as an owner and resident of Greencroft to share with you that Greencroft's southern infill was a mistake. After reviewing the plans for the townhouse development, I see a situation developing that is far worse than what occurred at Greencroft. With respect to the McRae proposal, the development proposes a row of 5 townhouses situated extremely close to the Heritage Mansion. This solid block of houses completely impinges upon the Heritage A Mansion and its estate-like grounds. The southern infill located to the side of Greencroft visually blocks only a small percentage of the mansion facade, while the McRae 3-story row houses blocks almost 100% of the west side of the Heritage A Nickel Mansion. The entire estate grounds of the Nickel Mansion should be preserved, not just the front yard. Another poorly thought out concept is the location of the garage for the Nickel House that in the current scheme is placed at the front of the property. At Greencroft, we built an underground garage for 6 vehicles. The entrance to the garage is discreetly located at the side of the residence. In closing, I'm an avid supporter of heritage restoration. I was attracted to the Greencroft development for one reason: saving and restoring the heritage residence in which we currently live. We only have one chance to create an exceptional gateway to Shaughnessy. I believe that is through the proper process and with adequate consultation that this is in fact possible. Thank you very much.
Next is Maury Richmond. Maury Richmond, followed by Thomas Greether.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors and invited guests. My name is Maury Richmond, and I live in a restored historic house 4 doors away from the front gardens of the Nichols Estate, having recently moved here from the Westmount area of Montreal, which is one of the most historic and well-protected areas of the country. My family and I chose Shaughnessy for the very reasons passionately mentioned here during the public hearings by previous speakers: the unparalleled majesty of the area, the serenity, privacy, and abundance of greenery, the predominantly single-family housing character, and the absence of multifamily dwellings. There is nothing more that I'd like to see than to have the Nichols House saved, restored, and maintained in perpetuity for future generations to enjoy. But I'd like to respond to a question posed at the beginning of this public hearing last Thursday as to why the City Staff and Co-Design panel is so highly in favor of this development while the neighboring community is so overwhelmingly opposed to it. The simple answer is that the citizens and taxpayers of the area, the very group most affected by such a development, had minimal to no input on the plans for the site. I was very pleased to read in the City report that co-design meetings were arranged to discuss options for the site, and that there was considerable public review in both the pre-application and post-application phases, including invitations to the 16 most adjacent property owners. I was surprised and disappointed to see that I was not included on this list, given my proximity to the site, especially since a quick scan of the site map appendix reveals that included in this group were the University Women's Club, 2 international consulates, and at least 3 vacant houses undergoing extensive renovations at the time. This strategic cherry-picking of such a small sampling is not indicative of responsible public representation and hardly provides a definitive consensus of neighborhood views. Even the advertised open house that took place, notification of which was only sent within a 2-block radius, presented an already decided plan not subject to design discussion. This would explain why there was such a minimal public outcry at the outset of the design process, but which gained momentum once the word got out to more of the area residents, exclusively through the diligent work of concerned neighbors. When we consider future precedents set by the potential approval of this application, we can't ignore the implied procedural acceptance that the needs and benefits of a community can be decided without the proper and sufficient input from the very citizens that will be affected most. When changing bylaws, altering city policies, and ignoring original development mandates are at stake, a more thorough public process is essential. The city report and public hearing has left me with more questions than answers. Why was such a minimal effort put into soliciting reactions from the community on this massive development proposal? Where are the reports that demonstrate why less invasive options were unfeasible for the development of the site, and how can this information be accessed for independent review? Why did it take over 3 months to provide some pro forma information concerning what was required to compensate the developer for heritage designation? What has changed in city policy that allows the project's pro forma calculations to be evaluated on current market values while the Greencroft development was evaluated on cost of the purchase price of the property? How can the city estimate the value of a restored Nichols estate, which is situated on arguably the most valuable parcel of all of Shaughnessy, to be below at least 6 other currently available properties, all of which have significantly less floor space and lot size in the area? Similarly, how can future townhouses proposed have a lower value per square foot than almost anywhere else in the city? Why does the developer of this project insist that this proposal is beneficial to the area, when as a resident of Shaughnessy he was so adamantly against the infinitely less invasive Greencroft development? What message is heard when SHPOA and over 95% of the almost 450 households in the area that expressed interest in this project are so vehemently opposed to the current application? How can anyone who believes in historic preservation approve of the Nichols home being dwarfed by a larger structure in close proximity, resulting in obstructed views and severely compromised sightlines of the grounds from McRae Avenue? Why can't heritage homes and sites be designated before the inevitable controversial and confrontational processes arise when greedy new owners and exploitive developers hold them for ransom in return for excessive profit, even if it means providing incentive to the current owners? Unless current Shaughnessy building guidelines and bylaws are respected, I urge Council to reject this application as it currently stands until more thorough analysis of alternative and more responsible development is proposed in collaboration with the community. Thank you.
Question for you, sir. Councillor Lyon.
I'd just like to ask the staff, there were some pretty strong allegations there that we were not doing the consultation properly, and I think it's a little unfair if the surrounding homes or zone happens to include the University Women's Club and empty homes. That's life, and I don't think we keep looking till we find a home with people in it, that there's a more kind of fixed parameter that we look at that we just have to kind of go by. But perhaps the staff could just explain what is our policy so that people understand, and did we in fact not consult with the neighbors, and to what extent is it reasonable to expect the neighbors to be the arbiters of somebody's development?
Okay. Your first question is, what is our standard method of notification? In a typical rezoning, we would ask the applicant to hold a pre-application open house and get some feedback on a proposal, which then they may or may not modify prior to submitting it as a rezoning application. Following that,
and who would be invited to that open house?
We would give them. We would do a notification map for them, which would be the same one then that we would use, that the city would use when it mails out a post-application letter to neighbors. So
and who's in that zone?
Typically, it's a 2-block radius. of the site. And again, there's a number of reasons for that. As you can imagine, between development applications and rezoning applications that are being processed by the city every day, it gets to be very, very expensive to keep on expanding those notification boundaries.
So in this is an odd configuration of blocks in this area. So you would go to Tecumseh and Angus Drive?
Well, there is a copy of the map that we
it's in
actually did, and I'm just looking for it. It's in Appendix G. So in addition to, so Appendix G 2 of 2 shows you, well, let me finish with the typical notification first. The typical notification would be a couple block radius of the site. In addition to that, we ask the applicant to put site signs up, and on a property like this, it would be, 2 signs at key places where pedestrians or cars might go by. And those signs are really meant to capture people who are beyond the boundaries, but who may walk by the site frequently and therefore have an interest in it. And it gives information about the proposal. It gives my phone number and the developer's phone number to ask more questions. It also, the site sign will capture renters in the neighborhood who aren't picked up by our notification, which relies on the property tax information. We download it that way. For this application, directly in response to concerns we heard about the Greencroft process, we added the extra step of a series of co-design meetings. And this was 6 months or so before the application actually was received. We'd been in some discussions with the developer. We were more or less on the same page that retention of the Heritage House was a priority, but whether it was retained in situ, as you see it now, or moved on the site, we were still wanted to bring that issue to the neighbors' attention. So the city hosted with the applicant 4 co-design meetings, and in Appendix G2 of 2, you'll see the map of people who were invited to participate. And I know there's been concern, why weren't more people invited? Why wasn't the whole notification that we use later invited to a co-design session? That session is really meant to be roll up your sleeves, spread out the clean white paper or the whiteboard, and brainstorm about different ways that a site could develop, giving contextual information about what bylaws are applicable now, what could be achieved under current zoning, and asking people what are their interests, what are their considerations. To do that with what would have amounted to 500 invitations going out is unwieldy. So as a first step in the process, these 4 co-design sessions were held. So as you can see here, where the X's on page 2 of 2 in Appendix G, 16 individual residents were invited to come and participate. And the map is, it really was trying to pick up the folks who we felt were going to be the most impacted by the new development. So that would explain why, for example, Highcroft Towers folks would have been invited. The Women's Club and the folks, 5-seaters, right next door to the site. In addition, though, to these folks being invited, the neighborhood organizations were asked to send representatives. So that's the Shaughnessy Heights Property Owners Association. I don't know what their membership is, but I think it's many hundreds, going far beyond First Shaughnessy, and the First Shaughnessy Advisory Design Panel and the Vancouver Heritage Commission. So the city really relied on those pre-established organizations to also represent the opinions of their members, and also to provide a source of information. Do they have newsletters or websites or something? It wasn't an effort to hide this information. It's an effort to say, we're kind of all in this together, and now you know about it, and let's go talk it up. So following the application submission, as I mentioned, we had the bigger notification. We held an open house. We had good participation there with follow-up comments received. We were invited to come to the Highcroft Towers complex specifically. We followed up with that. Again, another well-attended public meeting. We've been out twice to Chippewa to meet with that group. My door has been open. I've had lots of people come by, give calls and things like that. So I don't think it's been a lack of opportunity to learn about the project and provide input on it. I would stand by our process.
Thank you. Councillor Chow.
Thank you, Your Worship. That answers some of my question about consultation. There have been two speakers talking about the Greencroft, Mr. Hunt from the previous night, and then also the present speaker, Mr. Richmond. And they were talking about the financial analysis, how it was different, at least in their mind is different. Can you make any comments on, is it different? How is it different? In terms of the performer that was done for Greencroft, and
I'm not actually aware of the of that file, but I would assume it would be done with the same heritage policies and guidelines as we have in existence now.
Yeah, perhaps maybe you could educate us on how that financial analysis was done for Greencroft and how we already got the yellow memo on this one, but I was just wondering about the Greencroft as a comparison.
I haven't actually worked on that file, so I don't know it intimately, but it would be on the same basis, which is essentially valuing the land unencumbered.
But it must be in the file, correct?
It would be in the file, yes.
We could get it, yes. Okay.
I could confirm that to you, what the details of that are.
Sure. Okay, thanks. The other thing about notification is the initial notification was based on 2 blocks radius, so was much the same as Greencroft, but I guess Greencroft did not go through a rezoning application, like it wasn't changed from ODP to a CD1, is it?
Is that correct?
It's an HRA.
Right, an HRA process.
Thank you. It was an HRA application similar to a portion of this proposal, and there was a similar area of notification, and it came to a public hearing as well.
But the zoning of, like it was First Shaughnessy district, still the same, like it hasn't been changed from, I guess, do you call these RLS1 to CD1? This is what we're doing here, right, for the townhouses.
A portion of the site is FSD,
yes,
and it will remain FSD with an HRA overlay to preserve the heritage house. The western half of the site will be rezoned from FSD to CD1 to accommodate the townhouse proposal.
Yes. But in comparison to Greencroft, is a departure in that this is a rezoning to a CD1, correct? Thank you.
Councillor Anton.
Thank you, Your Worship. To our Director of Planning, if I might, the previous speaker mentioned the guidelines, and a couple of speakers this evening have referred to the First Shaughnessy District guidelines. And I think I asked this before, but maybe you could help me again. How do you balance the different? There seem to be some certain competing interests here, and how do you balance, which ones are important and which ones aren't important? Can you help us with that?
Well, certainly we try to see all issues as important, but we look to the direction that Council has given us in the policy. The two, and Ms. Potter, please add any details if I miss anything, but I'll keep it at a high level. The two governing policies are the ODP, the Official Development Plan from 1982, and the more recent vision from 2005. And I just happened to be looking at them while before you asked the question. The first reference in application in the ODP it says it's intended to be used in conjunction with all applicable policies and guidelines adopted by Council. That's how we tend to look at policy. We look at it in its totality and try to figure out what what the message is that comes out of that review as to what we should consider most important in the conflicting values that may come to an application. There's been the suggestion that I wrote down the word altering city policies, and I want to be clear to Council with our interpretation of the ODP and the vision. Because frankly, if Council is not happy with the direction of the ODP and the vision, Council may want to direct us to change the policy or to review the policy, but until, of course, Council does that, we're bound by it. And I look to the goals of the ODP. It's the very first goal. It's under heritage, to promote conservation and restoration of meritorious pre-1940s homes and maintenance of the estate-like image of development in accordance with design guidelines, to build on the heritage conservation efforts of the city, etc. And then when we go to the intent, it's rather clear, and I certainly felt in the early discussions around this, told staff what we are supposed to do. First, Shaughnessy is intended to remain a low-density residential area that is predominantly single-family in nature. Many folks have referenced that specific sentence. We certainly do think that given the location of this site in the context of First Shaughnessy, that intent is maintained. It will still be predominantly single-family in nature. Then it says, provision is made to allow some large pre-1940 houses and existing non-conforming uses to be redeveloped as multiple conversion dwellings. This option is intended to provide an incentive to encourage the retention and restoration of buildings that are generally not suited as one-family dwellings because of excessive floor area, layout, or previous conversion. Certainly we would see the Nickel House in this context. Other social and public uses are also permitted in this district, etc. And then it goes on to speak further about the nature of infill. Talks about the potential for medium density. So the way that we looked at this is that on the one hand, the general intent for the policy is to preserve the general single-family character of the neighborhood. And I think certainly staff take that very seriously. But the clear intent, the clear direction of the ODP is in situations where there are meritorious pre-1940s houses. We're supposed to do what we can. We're directed to do what we can to preserve them. That's in the ODP, so we think that this application, in fact, completely matches the spirit and intent and the specific wording of the ODP. Then, of course, the vision in 2005 went further, and I won't repeat Ms. Potter's analysis of the voting that went on in the vision, but in the development of the vision, identification was given about sites that were appropriate sites for densification, and certainly not all of Shaughnessy would meet those criteria. I would say the vast majority of Shaughnessy would not, but this site did, in our opinion. So we have both the ODP and the vision both supporting the application in our sense. Some have mentioned eco-density in the past. Certainly we have not applied an eco-density lens to this application at all. We're quite strongly feeling that the policy has really directed us in this way. A lot of the discussion has come down to whether or not there is too much valuation in order to preserve the heritage building. That's certainly something that I think the real estate department is better suited to discuss. But frankly, Council, the planning department saw no choice based on the wording of this policy to do whatever was in our power to preserve that heritage building, because that's what the policy says.
Okay. Councillor Deal.
Thank you. And I'm actually just going to take advantage of this moment to clarify what I asked earlier about that other site. And of course, it is 3 sites. And the current zoning and in compliance with the ODP would allow for 2 more houses on the site. Is that correct? So the discussion is not, does it stay as a green space unless we were to, because that parcel could be sold off and somebody else could build a house there.
That's correct.
All right, I just want to clarify that.
Councillor Ladner?
I think it's maybe a bit of a stretch to say that this is a single-family home configuration, but I'm wondering if you could explain, if someone could tell me, and it's not clear from looking at this model or the maps and so on, just if you were to stand up on the crescent and all this was built, how much of this could you see?
I'm going to look either to Shylin or perhaps the applicant. Do you want to start with it, Shylin?
I'll answer and say that the intent is that none of the new development would be visible from the crescent for two reasons. I believe the proposal is to introduce a band of landscaping which separates the new and the old development and to provide a buffer between the two portions. And there are essentially no changes being made to the historic Nicholl House as it fronts onto the crescent, with the exception of a garage.
So the impact on the character of the neighborhood would be more from the north and west than it would be from the south.
Councillor Ladner, I believe the exact intent is to preserve the appearance from the crescent.
Okay, thank you.
Anton?
Worship, just while we're clearing up questions with staff, I'll just, if I might ask a question that I asked last time to Ms. Potter. I was curious, it's not a determining factor, but I was curious about the census and the population of the neighborhood, and it's just another piece of information which I think would be interesting. Were you able to get that information?
I was. There were three angles that the information took. And it all measured, the first two pieces measured a period of time spanning from 1971 to 2006. And the first piece looks at the number of occupied dwellings for Shaughnessy. And what was surprising about the figure is how little the number of occupied dwellings had changed in First Shaughnessy in that 40-some years. In 1971, there were 2,910 dwellings, and in 2006, 3,021. So just 100 new dwellings, and that might be explained by multiple conversion, some of the like five-seaters complexes, infills that have happened. The second interesting statistic was the total population, which declined fairly substantially over that same period of time. 1971, 10,370 residents versus 2006 at 8,896. So about a 20% drop in residents. And then finally, a slightly different time period, 1981 to 2006, looking at the age bracket changes, noting that in 1981, and this is all sort of, they look at each neighborhood compared to the citywide average to see how a particular neighborhood strays from the average. In 1981, Shaughnessy had a higher percentage of folks under the age of 15 than the city as a whole had. They had 17% as compared to 14% citywide. In 2006, that age bracket, so up under 14, had fallen in First Shaughnessy more sharply than it had in the city as a whole. So we were starting to see a decline in Shaughnessy of kids under 15. Probably even more startling is the increase in folks over 65 in more recent years as compared to changes in the city as a whole. In 1981, Shaughnessy had a 14.5% age of their residents were over 65, and by 2006 that had risen to nearly 20%. So what you have here is a trend where more people are older and few people are younger, I guess is the bottom line.
Thank you, Councillor
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just one question. We've got disappearing people, but also I just want to talk about the disappearing trees that may be disappearing because we understand they're not healthy. Obviously, in the drawing there, we want to see the houses as they exist, but I gather that they will be covered as well And I just want to hear that from the landscape people. On 16th, is the plan for the townhouses to be covered as well on 16th?
The intent is that the planting will be continuing right from Granville up 16th and up to the Nickel House in terms of essentially almost a boulevard type tree planting of red maples, red sunset maples.
And now maples lose their leaves, so I'm just wondering, will there be other trees to fill that in for the part of the year? Maples are gone a lot of the year, so I'm just wondering for...
In terms of the planting approach, it tends to be mixed broadleaf evergreens and conifers to the east and the south, and as you head north, the tendency, or what we've opted to do, is primarily go deciduous trees to let a lot more of the winter light coming in on the north side. The planting, however, under the trees themselves is more of a broadleaf evergreen, so because of the grade change, what we were hoping is to achieve privacy from sight lines of people driving by and walking by, looking up into the units, and then a filigree of branches beyond the broadleaf evergreen planting.
So there would be a screen, in essence, of plantings that way too. So it's not quite clear from the drawings. I understand why. I just wanted to make sure that would exist. Thank you.
Sorry, just to follow up on that. These are details that I was going to ask at some point, so this is a good time. There's a retaining wall. There will continue to be a retaining wall?
What we do is save the existing retaining wall and repair it. That's at the bottom of the property. We are adding walls in behind it, but we're actually adding broadleaf evergreen planting so those walls become invisible. So primarily it will be the existing wall that becomes visible from the street.
The original stonework. It's granite, isn't it?
Yes, it's a mixture of granite and some local boulders and things.
All right, so that will, because it's hard to see it in the artist's rendition, but I can sort of see it on the model. So that will still be there, and there will be a row of trees outside of it or just inside of it?
Well, we've actually been in discussions with the city because there's quite a green verge there about adding more street trees on the green verge potentially as well, add layering to the project.
So step it up.
Yeah, exactly. So that instead of just keeping that sort of large lawn area out in front of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I could just supplement that, Councillor Deal. There is a design development condition in Appendix C, which would have our engineering staff go out to the site, and wherever there is an ability to plant more street trees, and again, it would depend on sight lines to make sure that you keep the traffic safe, and where the driveway access is, you have to work around that, but anywhere there can be street trees, our expectation is this development would provide it.
Thank you.
Dan Bennett of Thomas Creature.
Hand out, Your Worship. I'm a lawyer that, Your Worship, and City Councillors, that practices extensively in local governments, acting for local governments and dealing with public hearings and challenges therefrom. And I came today acting for one of the neighbors on the Crescent who opposes this, but I came today to speak only about a process issue. And it's something that has come up time and time again involving the disclosure of the financial information and the ability of the neighbors to properly analyze that. In the handout, there's a letter that I sent to Ms. Potter last week. And what I have done in the first part of the letter is just reiterate some concerns that Mr. Spaxman had put on in terms of getting the information that was given to the neighbors. And I'd like to turn on page 2 and just deal with what the courts have said are the disclosure requirements with respect to public hearings. And the courts have said it's not reasonable, and reading from the third full paragraph that talks about the Court of Appeal, it's not reasonable to expect anyone to mount an intelligent response without reasonable prior access to relevant materials. And the courts have defined that as including reports and documents that are material to the approval, amendment, or rejection of the bylaws. And given that one of the prime issues in this case is ensuring that the owner is adequately compensated through the heritage designation. The next paragraph, I say that the financial information is fundamental for the neighbors to have to analyze and understand exactly what is the basis for the 16 units. And you've heard different numbers that neighbors have put forward. The fact, I cite another case there, the fact that council doesn't actually see the numbers doesn't change the disclosure obligations on the part of the city under the Vancouver Charter and the law to provide that information. And I note at the bottom of the page that another of even greater concern is that there's a complete lack of disclosure with respect to why it is that the existing Shaughnessy Heights official development plan does not allow for a financially viable option. And I note that the last hearing, the city staff has said that it did not pan out financially, those options, but there's no backup materials. Over on page 3, the fact that it's confidential to the developer or the owner is not something that precludes disclosure. When the owner goes through a public process like this, you cannot rely on confidentiality to refuse to provide critical information to allow the neighbors to understand the financial consequences. I'd just like to flip to page 5 and just talk briefly about Greencroft, because Greencroft was a learning lesson that the city went through a number of years ago. And on page 5, I've attached a page from Mr. Spaxman's report where the city had hired Mr. Spaxman after Greencroft to analyze that whole process. And recommendation number 5 from Mr. Spaxman is very apropos. He says it's desirable the city provides for greater transparency in the financial and density bonusing agreements that are negotiated. Because these are public assets determined by City Council, it seems reasonable to give public access to pro forma calculations. He says, alternatively, the appointment of an independent auditor to confirm the fairness of the agreement may be appropriate. Well, neither of those things happened in this case, with the exception, and on the last page, I had Mr. Woods, who spoke earlier about what information they did get from the city, to put out the four or five values that are critical and what they have received and what they haven't received. And that's what page 6 is, to show you where there's some serious differences. And the first one, just as an example, is the value of Old House on the 2 lots, and a $10 million number from the neighbors versus a 6.1. And it's not just general numbers that need to be provided, it's the backup information so that the assumptions can be tested. So, to summarize, fairness requires openness and transparency, and it should not be dealt with in in-camera meetings where assurances are given with respect to disclosure. The disclosure should be given to the neighbors, and that will allow them to understand the numbers and analyze them and make meaningful submissions to City Council. Thank you. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Victor Pillar. Followed by Margaret Burrell and Tony Tang.
Mayor and Council, my name is Victor Pillar, and I'm a long-term resident of First Shaughnessy, and I am against this development application. The Planning Department put forward 3 criteria supporting this development application. Number 1, the presence of an undesignated heritage house, 2, an unusual large lot, and 3, that is situated on 2 arterial roads, 16th Avenue and Granville Street. The brief history of Nicol House as follows: built in 1912 and eventually purchased in 1939 by the Bentley family. And up to 1948, the estate comprised of only the 2 upper lots on McRae Avenue near the Crescent. In 1948, the Bentleys bought Lot 1 to the north to secure their view. The year is significant because heritage in Shaughnessy has to predate 1940. My contention is Lot 1 is not historically part of Nicol's house, and if we are talking heritage preservation and not just densification, Lot 1 is in historical heritage context should not be part of this application. However, Lot 1 is entitled to one single-family house. This would of course mean that the heritage house sits on a smaller lot and is not situated on two arterial roads. Consequently, two of the arguments brought forward by the planning department to support this application are clearly invalid. In 2001, when Greencroft redevelopment application was approved, the ballroom, a later addition by Lieutenant Governor Eric Hamber, was removed by heritage planners, arguing that it was not part of the original historic house. This represents, in my opinion, a clear precedent. Now I'm come to the power of public opinion. In 1982, the University Women's Club sold part of its land to a developer who then erected condos on the site. This created such an uproar in the neighborhood that it led to the enactment of the first Shaughnessy official development plan, our current bylaw. The city council of the time, with clear vision, helped the residents to achieve this. These bylaws clearly state no new condo development in first Shaughnessy. Shaughnessy, the present feeling of the residents of this historic district can be judged by a computer survey. 445 people responded, 89% are against the condos. The city, according to Vicky Potter, received over 200 letters opposing them. This development proposal would make a mockery of the official bylaw of the district. I believe residents should have a major say in local issues. At least this is what politicians promise us at election time. Now to the solution. The only reasonable solution to the problem facing us is to follow the original proposal of the developer. He suggested moving Nicol House closer to the crescent to be aligned with the adjacent houses. This would then give Mr. Bell 2 additional clear city lots to develop, hopefully in accordance with the first Shaughnessy development plan. This should be a win-win situation. This should please the developer, since his original idea is recognized. The residents who are against spot zoning will be delighted, and the council should be happy as it could avoid making an unpopular decision introducing CD1 zoning and condos into first Shaughnessy. As an adequate compensation for the developer for not demolishing Nicol House. Moving the house was Mr. Bell's original idea. He's a smart man and a seasoned developer, and would have calculated his profit margin to his satisfaction. It seems to me that the only people solidly against this proposal are the Heritage Commission, who would rather save part of a rose garden than save the whole historic Shaughnessy district from a precedent-setting condo development. Incidentally, at the previous session of the public hearing, the Director of Planning advised Council that they are not bound by precedent, as each development is unique. This is a rather simplistic view. If you allow this condo development, then the next developer will have an easier time demanding the same or similar treatment, hence the slippery slope. To sum up, move the house forward, work within the rules of the first Shaughnessy development plan, and please say no to CD1 zoning and condos in Shaughnessy. Thank you.
Margaret Burrell. No. Tony Tang. Tony Tang. George Heslop. George Heslop. Oh.
Good evening. Your Worship, councillors, city staff, friends, neighbors, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tony Tang. I'm a resident of 3rd Shaughnessy, a former director of the Shaughnessy High Property Owner Association, and a former working group member for the RS5 and RS6 for the City of Vancouver. I'm here today to speak against the CD1 rezoning of 3238 Granville Street and the westerly portion of 1402 McRae Avenue. The McRae rezoning area is part of the Crescent in Shaughnessy. The Crescent is the crown jewel of Shaughnessy. This area is purposely bounded by Granville, Wolf, and Matthews to make it a distinctive area. Just the thought of a dense townhouse development within this neighborhood makes me wonder where the sensibility of the developer is. About 15 years ago, the whole city was in a big uproar about property owners' right against the community's rights. The communities and the neighbors were at odds with the property owners about building large houses, even though the designs were legal according to the bylaws at the time. A building moratorium was put in place for a long time until the RS5 was worked out by all concerned parties. Even when a property was purchased under the old bylaws, the property owners still had to build his or her house under new bylaws to please the community. We have no such conflicts here. The properties at McRae were purchased under the bylaw of FSODP. That's First Shaughnessy Official Development Plan. The FSODP are still the current bylaws. Therefore, this property should be developed under the FSODP bylaws. The Shaughnessy community is not the one wanting to change the zoning here. The developer is the one who wants to develop these 16 townhouses for profit. The developer is the one applying to change the zoning for profit. It is my understanding that the planning department is recommending this rezoning because they want to secure the Nickel House with a heritage revitalization agreement to prevent the possibility of future demolition. But the First Shaughnessy district itself is a heritage district. It itself also is a heritage icon. It also needs heritage protection. The FSD Official Development Plan is designed to protect this heritage district. I'm not sure how we can pit one heritage policy against another heritage policy and come up with 16 townhouses and 50 parking spaces. At this time, of the 445 residents who responded to the rezoning survey, we have close to a 90% response in objection to this rezoning proposal. This survey was done fairly and openly. The survey results soundly indicate that something is not right. I urge Your Worship, the Mayor, and the council members of the Chamber to vote against this rezoning. Thank you very much.
George Heslop. Vanessa Weevil. Oh, are you George Heslop?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good evening, Your Worship and the Council, ladies and gentlemen. I live at 1551 West 16th, so I have no conflict of interest in this. But I'm going to give you 30 years of cab driving experience, taking people from the airport to downtown. I used to own at Blacktop. And back out to the airport. I haven't been around the world, but they're so impressed coming into this city through this Shaughnessy Heights and the trees. You have the second jewel of Vancouver. The first one is Stanley Park. The second one is Shaughnessy. Whether you know it or not, all the young tourist people or information booths do not have the experience I have with the number of people I've carried into this city from all over. First Shaughnessy is really something special. I don't make any money on it, but I live at 1551 Granville. Now, those trees are over 80 years old. The rest of the country is going green. Green meaning you save the trees. You knock down 80 to 90 trees. They can talk about the odd alder there. They're not rotten. And we're going to put in 51 more cars. We've already got a problem, my place in the summer, with the heavy traffic, the gas, the fumes. It's bad enough than coming up Fur and going along 16th, turn up Granville. I don't know how you're even going to get traffic into this so-called 51-car garage. But to knock down those trees, I mean, I'll never see the rose garden anyhow. I don't even know what the house looks like, and I'm only a block and a half away. But the trees are beautiful there. You have something really beautiful. You cannot knock down 80-year-old trees, or they might even be older. Because 20 years, you're not going to get a tree too high, I'm going to tell you that. You might get it 30 feet. And I don't know what else to say. I'm going to cut it short. People are going to get mad at me for not taking up my 5 minutes. But really, you have a jewel here. And those big trees you shouldn't cut down. And I thank you, and I can't get to see the road.
It's actually a question to the staff based on what the speaker said. Can you just clarify what the obligation is to the developer with regards to the trees, were we to not approve this? Is there an obligation? So if we turn down this rezoning, is there any obligation to protect those trees?
No, it's a private development site, so the expectation would be that this developer, or perhaps a future developer, would come forward with a different proposal, even one that could be achieved under existing zoning, which would be a roughly 15,000 square foot mansion on that site, would significantly, I mean, maybe the arborist is here and could speak to that, although we certainly haven't evaluated the proposal, nor has the arborist on anything other than this. My understanding is that once you start removing any of the trees and leave them not protected by each other, the health and stability start to go, but perhaps
So, and then the second question around the zoning, would there be an obligation to plant trees?
Absolutely. I mean, we always
both under this application, or were we not to approve?
Yes, that we all any application that we consider obligates the developer. I mean, we look at it and try to at all times conserve trees where we can. That's always our first line of attack is to save the trees that are there. If that can't be done, then we scrutinize the landscape plan of whatever is proposed and make them add more trees, landscaping whenever we see that there isn't enough.
Thank you.
Did you want to hear from
us? Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. The previous speaker talked about the traffic, and I just want to be confirmed that as far as the city is concerned, there's no plan to alter that intersection of Granville and 16th at this point in time, correct?
Councillor, there are, as I mentioned in the last public hearing, we are planning to normalize this intersection, but we don't have any plans in next, for example, next couple of years. Maybe not.
No, so you're leaving the intersection the way it is right now, right?
Right.
At this point in time.
Yes.
So, and you're aware that this is going to add 50 vehicles in the neighborhood.
As I mentioned, that though the parking, they are providing parking of 50 vehicles, but the trips this development is going to generate is 11 vehicles in AM peak hours and 13 vehicles in PM peak hours. So the trips which are being generated by development is not that much, though they are providing a lot of parking to accommodate the visitor parking, disability parking, and kind of 2 parking stalls for each unit.
So Oh, so there's no plan to change that intersection right now?
Not right now.
Okay, thank you.
Not immediately.
Councillor Deal?
Open the parking. I know this was answered the first night, and I apologize. We can keep it short. But in terms of the numbers of spaces, so it's 29 spaces for the 16 units. I thought we had cut down our numbers from below that, almost 2 per unit, or what are our current parking standards?
Our current parking standards, as per our bylaw, we require only 16 spaces, so that means 1 space per unit. But because for this development is pretty unique, and the developer is proposing 50 parking stalls, including a lot of visitor parking
19,
stalls.
19, that's a lot.
Yeah. And
more than one visitor spot per unit.
The reason I believe is that there is not enough parking available on the street, and they want it to be all the visitors and all the vehicles underground and not visible on the streets.
Like, would they rent them out to other people who live in the area of the Crescent? I mean, it just sounds like an awful lot for both. I mean, that's 2 cars per unit plus 1 visitor per unit, all in there at the same time. That just sounds like more than certainly I see in my neighborhood, in our parking garage.
I don't think.
I mean, even if you can't park on the street, I understand not wanting to crowd the streets, but I guess this is based on a study, based on what is it based on?
Maybe the consultant can add into that, Flores.
As I said, I guess in my opening comments.
Yeah, and I apologize for not remembering the details.
Well, basically the 50 stalls, as the traffic engineer suggested, were my instructions to the architects when we designed this was let's think about how this thing is going to work efficiently. Given the fact that you've got 16th and Granville, which allows for no parking down there, there's no parking on one side of McRae completely. You have the University Women's Club on the other side, which has functions going continuously and takes up what limited parking there is on the opposite side of McRae for half the block only. All the parking for this particular development, if somebody comes to visit somebody, they'd likely have to park probably up on the Crescent, which is also generally busy. So I instructed them. I said, let's be generous with the parking. We're allowing for at least 2 stalls per unit to start with, and then it sort of became a function of the design of the underground parkade that sits under the block of the 2 buildings there. And when you divide it up with the drive aisles and allow for some extra space there, that's what it came up with. Now, I mean, if it's a really big concern, people don't want to have enough parking allowed. I mean, I can cut it down. It's certainly going to save me some money.
But it won't change the way that the development looks.
No, it's not going to change the way the development looks. And as I said, I think it's sort of a misinterpretation of the intent here to think that I'm not running a commercial parking garage. It's for the private use of the development. It's not being rented out to cars. 50 cars aren't going to be coming in and out of there every 15 minutes. It's not a commercial parking garage. That's not the intent here. The intent was to provide more than ample parking for the residents to keep cars. You're talking about people that are going to be coming from large houses. Myself, for instance, I mean, here I am living in Shaughnessy for 26 years. My kids have grown up. I could be a candidate for this. Well, I have 3 vehicles. I have a collector vehicle I've driven twice in 3 years, but I have somewhere to park it. Now, there are people like me who would be looking at these units potentially, and if they park a car down there, the thing isn't going to be coming out in and out every 15 minutes.
I hear your explanation, and I appreciate that. I just am surprised in this day and age that we're planning for 3 cars, including visitor spaces per unit. When proximity to transit is one of the main reasons that we're trying to say that this might be acceptable here. So
Just if I could have a last comment. The hope is, with this being on an arterial close to transit and whatnot, that eventually people will get used to using the transit and it will be convenient, and they will just park their cars down there. Maybe they'll sell them after a while and the place will be empty.
Convert to storage lockers. Okay, thanks.
Vanessa Wiebel, followed by Terry Condu.
Your Worship, Council, my name is Vanessa Wiebel. I'm a health practitioner in the Highcroft Medical Center that is across the street of the rezoning application area. Tonight I have the honor of representing not just myself but 16 other practitioners out of the building. We have actually just obtained the information about this proposal just about 14 days ago. We got our hands on it. Before that, we ran through an odyssey of phone calls trying to obtain the information as soon as we saw the sign-up, just as a little bit of input. We have not received any invitations to any open houses. As you can see, we're across the street of the intersection 16th and Granville. Even though we're professionals and we lease, we have not been consulted. I myself have been in the building for 10 years, and I myself originate from Hamburg, Berlin, and London, and I'm making this point because I have lived in countries and places where the density and population in the town made the towns unlivable. My brother can no longer jog in the middle of noon in Berlin due to the ozone layer, levels of the town. We're talking Berlin, we're talking also London. I myself have chosen Vancouver as my home because I personally really appreciate the nature, the beauty Vancouver holds as we see it, but also what Vancouver holds within itself in a city. I have read several several books from German researchers of urban town planning, Dr. Lafrenz and Mr. Ossenberger, publishing a paper in 1992 talking about the ecology of cities and how important green spaces and green arteries are in order to provide a good quality of air, not just for the residents, but basically making the cities livable. He had a research in which he found out that taking out a chunk out of a star system, which is like a green artery, like a vein system, if you take that out, 80% of the oxygen of that region is decreased. If I look at this rezoning application, and if I look at the location of this particular property in the bigger picture of Vancouver, Shaughnessy is one of the major big green arteries that Vancouver holds. It is a very precious link that enables us to have really good quality air. I would invite anybody in council to go onto the intersection of 16th and Granville and count the cars going through per day, the trucks, the pedestrians, the bikes, and then take a couple of steps up McRae, and suddenly you have the feeling you are in a different place. The tranquility is amazing. Even after a busy hot day, the coolness of the trees just really is welcoming and makes the city very livable. Whereas if I would invite you to go to LA or Mexico, you might remember from some holidays in the heat, the air sometimes is really everything else but beautiful over there. So I personally, as a resident of Vancouver, wish Vancouver to stay as livable as it is, and therefore I stand here before you today. We have made a couple of points, and I'm going to give council what we wrote, but I'm not going to repeat some things that have been said. But I would like to make another point for inhabitants of the city that can't speak because they cannot write. I pass this little alcove of woods that is 60 feet high daily. Several times, if I go to work, if I go from lunch, if I want to have a break, or if I go back to my, bike and cycle home. I choose the high, so say, elevation, that little steep with my bike every day, not just for exercise, but just for the enjoyment. And as I pass, I see foxes, I see badgers, I see eagles, I see crows, I see ravens. I have even seen a coyote. I have seen hummingbirds. And hummingbirds is a very delicate little bird that doesn't like to live in busy places. It has for some reason chosen, why, I don't know, the property of Granville. That I think it's 32, help me with the numbers, 38, thank you. It just decides to live there, and it's beautiful. And you can hear the birds, and it just gives a flair that is unbelievably soothing. Clients of mine go there after a session just to sit and relax. And it's a tranquil place. Now, if I think of walking out of the Highcroft building and facing the 16 townhouses, that tranquility is going to be gone. The planned proposal of plans are supposed to be 40 feet high. When? it's going to be gone. The buildings, as they are proposed, are not going to have any soil underneath that is going to allow any kind of wildlife to continue to exist. I think we have a beautiful biotope at the end of this spot at an intersection that really does not need any additional traffic added. We've just heard from this one man how many cars we are to be expecting if there is 16 townhouses. I walk past the intersection every day, and every week I have a sign up that says, please tell me if you've witnessed accidents so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so.
You have a question.
Weekly.
You have a question from Councillor Capri.
Okay. I'll just wrap up quickly. So the safety of that intersection is a big concern for us because we've seen so many close accidents and a lot of jackknives going down McRae, especially in bad weather, even in rain, and even in sun, there's some people that don't make up that slope. So we, as the practitioners, we would really, really ask council in this to take this part to consideration, and we would really ask that the general concerns for safety of the general public affected in the neighbourhood and the passing traffic, as well as the air quality and the need to override the interest of private profits. Thank you.
Capri.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation and for choosing Vancouver.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify, with the alcove of woods, you understand that regardless of whether we approve this application or not, it's probably gone.
I realize that, but I would ask council that if you make that choice of having to build there, we would propose, and we wrote that in our paper, that it would be a single house dwelling. Our preference would be the bottom lot not being touched, so that could be used sort of as a park or a garden or a sanctuary. The middle part would have possibly two.
But we don't
families.
get to choose that.
I know, but that's my wish. Okay, thank you. And if the Heritage House would move, that's my wish, and that's what I'm here for. I realize I might be dreaming, but you can dream.
Should run for council. Thank you very much for that. And I've got a question for our staff. And I mean, this one's way out there, but have we actually done a livability/green analysis of this application versus the current zoning ability that would say you have the ability to knock down the house and build 3? Have we kind of done that kind of analysis?
No. What I would say is, and I don't know if the applicant's sustainability consultant is here tonight. Yes. Okay. To be able to talk about the features of this proposal, we have not done a comparison between this proposal and a hypothetical other proposal. But would you like to hear from the sustainability consultant?
Well, I'm really interested because so many people have talked about the whole green question and the impacts of building and the trees, and of course there's also the green question of knocking down a heritage house and building 3 monster houses, and so I'm curious where the chips would fall if we're looking at strictly a question around what's most environmentally the way to go.
Okay. Did you want to have the consultant speak about? I think that the sustainability analysis under the Built Green BC program, which is, I believe,
could we do that at the end so we can hear the rest of the speakers?
Okay.
And then
that would be fine. I'm just thinking that other speakers might address that or ask that, and it might put some context on some of their presentations, if in fact. But I'm happy to get the answer whenever.
Okay. Well, Councillor Deal has a question.
I have a question as well. In fact, I don't know how long the presentation might be, but if it was quick, I wouldn't mind hearing it now, because my question also has to do with something that we're not just picking on you. I ask this question a lot, and the speaker raised it, which is that when we look at the plantings and landscape architecture, are we also looking at the variety of species of foliage that would support a variety of species of wildlife? Different birds. Like we're planning for that in some of our other, like in East Fraserlands, they're designing specifically bird corridors. So that's the question, and I actually would like to ask that of the applicant.
Okay, I'm just noting that we won't be able to finish the speakers tonight, but I was hoping to hear from as many as possible so they don't have to come back the next night.
So do people want to hear this answer or no?
So if people don't mind coming back the next night, okay.
So we can keep it relatively brief. This is a question to the applicant.
No, but question, what can I give my written parts and the CD with the contents?
Okay, we'll have the consultant to make a...
Yeah, it doesn't need to be lengthy, but just a brief overview would be good.
Brief overview.
There's actually quite a wide species selection that we've brought into the project. What we're expecting is that it's going to attract probably a wide variety of birds and wildlife, and I think the water will add to that aspect of it in terms of creating more diversity. What generally takes place is the greatest biodiversity usually takes place at transitional zones, which
Can you put estuary in there? But, okay, so that was, you were mindful of that when you designed not just how it looks, but the biodiversity, including that which will be attracted to it.
And the acoustics, to be honest with you, we're hoping that white noise to a degree will help with the traffic.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe just a few comments then about the sustainability plan. I know we don't want to take a lot of time, but could you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak very briefly. What we've done is to look at this development under the lens of a number of different strategies that the city has set out, one of which is the green building strategy. We've used the model of what's happened at the Olympic Village to look at how we're dealing with the property. We're also looking at the City of Vancouver is also the process of coming up with a single-family home policy or a bylaw that looks at single-family developments in terms of sustainability. And what we've done is to actually look at the framework of that as we look at this project. And the markers on that is one of which is definitely livability. And it dovetails in with Built Green, which is it's like LEED. It's like a certification system on sustainability. So we've basically done that sort of broad sweep look at all these different policies and strategies that are out there so that we actually create something that's more than just livable, but it's actually giving back to the environment in this very beautiful area.
So, but it's not required LEED. It's a Built Green is the system you're using?
Yes.
Who is that registered through? Who?
Built Green is actually a Canadian developed system, and it's developed specifically for Canadian single-family row housing type developments. LEED.
It's not through Cascadia, is it?
No. No.
Perhaps you can. I would love a memo on it.
Yeah, the Canadian Green Building Council has actually recommended on their website that is an alternate to as a system.
So I know there's some alternates.
They're supporting it.
Yeah. I see that our director of planning has a comment on that as well.
We're just trying to find the section. It's
I was looking for it too.
I'm looking on Appendix C, page 3 of 4, sustainability.
Yes.
Provision of a LEED scorecard. You saw that original note, and then in sorry to let you catch up to that, but we actually have provided alternative wording because the square footage associated with this development does not lend itself to the LEED system, and we caught that and have changed it to Build Green Gold.
One of our, okay.
Here's the nuance, Council. If this were eco-density, the requirement, given that it's an HRA rezoning, in possibly a few months from now, depending on what Council chooses to do with eco-density, it would likely be a requirement that this be Build Green Gold as a standard. That's the evolving direction that I'll be reporting to you on February 26th.
Right.
Because this predates eco-density, we have not applied that standard. But this is an HRA and a rezoning, and Council can do what it wants.
And Built Green has gold as one of its designations.
Yes, that's correct.
And this is Built Green certification?
It is Built Green certification. And we actually, the information that has been spoken of, we actually have that information and the list of different things that would be in that bylaw, and that's what we have applied as we looked at Built Green as being the appropriate system to look at.
I'd be very interested in perhaps some feedback from staff at the end on what would be required to bump it up. A last brief comment, and I think it's just a comment, not a question, because very few people can answer this at this point. I'm starting to look at replacing the ecosystem services when you decrease permeability or take from an older tree to a younger tree, which in fact provides more services in some ways because it's growing faster. But I doubt you have that analysis, but it's the kind of thing I'm starting to look for, so just as a note.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, Terry Condio, followed by David Swan.
I don't have to be as eloquent this time because I spoke earlier for somebody else. Now I'm speaking on my behalf. Mayor Sullivan, councillors, and those councillors that would make it to the meeting, thank you very much, and the other members of the public here tonight. I would like to discuss the project at 1402 McRae Avenue in a different fashion. As a resident of Highcroft Towers, adjacent to 1402 McRae, and Highcroft's located at 1445 Marpole, in case anybody doesn't know, I would like to approach this project on a personal basis. Like Mr. Cito, who spoke on Valentine's Day about his longtime roots in Vancouver, I'd like to begin by saying my grandfather came here in 1910 from Italy. He lived on Alexander Street when hardly anybody lived in the city, then moved to Little Italy in Strathcona, and finally on to 32nd and Main in 1928. So our family's had its roots in East Vancouver, not Shaughnessy. So it seems strange that I'm here speaking about this, but for the last 14 years I've lived at Highcroft Towers. After my father came back from World War II, he became a postman. His first route included 1402 McRae Avenue. Probably he's been on that property more often than anybody in this room except for Mr. Bell. He moved to the Shaughnessy Walk to another Shaughnessy Walk only after another postman bumped him off the walk. As a kid that lived in East Vancouver, I couldn't understand why he'd want to deliver over in Shaughnessy. Why would you want to deliver where the rich were? I was born, my grandmother was a CCF. I couldn't understand this concept. He told me Shaughnessy is the gem of the city. He said the area was serene and made his job much easier. Despite the fact that each house received magazines like most of us receive bills, he did not want to give up his walk. He said during the summer months, the shade provided by the wonderful trees in the area not only shielded him from the sun, but also made him feel like he was in a city within a city. I believe that working in such a serene settings for most of his career has allowed him to reach his present age of 84 years old. The lady spoke about serenity in that area. It's true. My dad can attest to that because it's such a great area. I remember as a kid riding my bicycle over to another walk that my dad delivered to in Shaughnessy. I was always amazed at how quiet the neighborhood was and the number of trees in the neighborhood. I thought, this is where I would like to live someday. Although I do not live in First Shaughnessy, I live on the outskirts. I just have to cross the street and walk up McRae Avenue and I'm at the Crescent. And like that lady, I've also encountered coyotes and been followed down from the Crescent on a few nights. The magic of Shaughnessy can convert even someone like me from East Vancouver, who will never be able to live in First Shaughnessy, but is a fan of the city within the city. Now for the present. Each morning I wait for the 10 Hastings bus at 16th and Granville in Vancouver on my way to work at Granville and Hastings. This trip should take 15 to 20 minutes. Instead, I wait 15 minutes between buses, and in many cases our stop is passed over because of a full bus, and therefore I have to wait 25 to 30 minutes to catch a bus. I can remember a few short years ago, we were promised by City Council at that time that the 98 Rapid bus would not disrupt the trolley service throughout the Granville corridor. This promise was empty. Rather than waiting 6 minutes for a bus at 16th and Granville during those morning rush hours like I used to, it's now 15 to 20 minutes with no guarantee that I'll even get the bus at that time. I don't need to remind the mayor about the last time the citizens of Vancouver's neighborhoods felt they weren't being listened to. If I remember correctly, the mayor was the only sitting councillor to retain his seat that time. If we increase density even further in our neighborhood without addressing the infrastructure required, such as buses, more and more people will begin to drive to work. We hear how more and more people are walking to work each day, especially those living in the West End. This is out of necessity due to the poor bus service more so than an environmental statement. If we believe that those that would move into this development would be using buses or walking to their destinations, why does the development need 50 parking spaces? At a time in the city's history when we have water restrictions in summer months, an increased concern about waste disposal, a lack of decent transit, traffic cones popping up like weeds throughout the rest of the city just so people can preserve and reserve their parking in front of their own house.
Summarize.
Okay. A police force that increased by 17 instead of 100 projected as required. And in other Greater Vancouver cities where patients are being removed from hospital hallways, we should stop and think rather than start and develop. Thank you very much.
David Kwan. No. Phil Yacht. Followed by Beverly O'Toole.
Mr. Mayor, Council, and those interested in heritage and the proposed change to First Shaughnessy. I'm a longtime resident of Vancouver. I've lived in Vancouver for 55 years and the last 23 years in First Shaughnessy in a Heritage B listed house. I'm currently a board member of SHPOA and previously was appointed by Council to the First Shaughnessy Advisory Design Panel, and I served for the maximum allowable number of years while Richard Keat was the chair. He was your first speaker on this topic of 1402 McRae. I've talked with him, two architects who do good work in First Shaughnessy, and the work they do respects the First Shaughnessy ODP, as well as the guidelines. They've told me that the proposed condo development of townhouses is so close to First Shaughnessy that the design of the condos should respect the official development plan of First Shaughnessy instead of the faux classical design that you see here. This design resembles a 2- and 3-story tall, 260-foot wide billboard that you'd think is advertising condos in the suburbs instead of expressing an estate-like character that could fit in with First Shaughnessy. There's no tripartite expression, there's no robust design, and it's not neighborhood friendly. There's no breathing room like other properties. It's on a site that should not be developed according to the architect, Bruno Freschi, the author of the First Shaughnessy ODP guidelines. There's no accounting for taste, but this project has no respect for First Shaughnessy and this proposed design, and I urge you to oppose this project and ask Real Estate Services here at City Hall to redo their numbers using a different basis than the secret one that they stand behind. There are other ways of rewarding the proponent for designating the Heritage A house with an HRA without making him load the property with a massive condo townhouse development. So many times the City Council's had to deal with the downtown east side where you keep being asked for more and more money to solve a problem. This evening you have an opportunity to make a decision that will not cost the city any money, and you can protect First Shaughnessy from condo development. Plan A, studied by the City Real Estate Services, is based on allowing the demolition and then construction of 3 new mansions that meet the guidelines of First Shaughnessy. Plan B is keeping the Heritage House, but destroying the gateway to First Shaughnessy with a condo development on a busy street, but also on McRae, a quiet residential street, and also putting a garage in the front yard of one of the most beautiful heritage houses in the city. I don't want to lose this very special heritage house, but I also don't want to see a wall of condo townhouses at the gateway to First Shaughnessy. And anyone who's been inside the heritage house feels that it's a gem worth saving. It would be horrible if a developer proposed building townhouses like these all along the edge of Stanley Park just because the causeway is such a busy street. It should also be unacceptable to build condos on the edge of First Shaughnessy. So how can Council do it? Despite the instructions of June 2007, where Council put a temporary moratorium on the granting of heritage density, Council can do what it wants. Here's a case where this Heritage A house is in the center of heritage homes, it's on the crescent, and it deserves special attention. In this instance, and only in this instance, I'm told by a senior planner, that density could be shifted out of First Shaughnessy under the policy report titled Amendment to Transfer Density for First Shaughnessy, dated August 25th, 2000. And that report says conservation and protection of heritage buildings and sites listed on the Vancouver Heritage Register is the object of transfer of density. Any site within the city is permitted to transfer density as long as the donor and recipient sites are not separated by a zoning boundary line. As you can see, this condo project, the donor and recipient failed the test because the Heritage House is in First Shaughnessy, and the condo development is in a proposed CD1 zone right across the boundary. I would add that the bonus density could be given for designation as well under an HRA. I don't think that planners would object if they received residential density for zoning where they haven't used the space. And just to summarize, the city approved for the Wing Sang building on Pender Street 159,162 square feet, and the current selling price from donors who have contacted is $60 per square foot. The sellers who responded said they would not sell for less because they don't have much left. And so it doesn't take a real estate expert to multiply 159,000 times 60 to get 9,549,000. The Bank of Montreal on Pender got density worth $8.1 million.
Sir, you have two questions. Are you wrapped up now? Councillor Ladner?
I just want to clear up, I think, again, this question of the allegations of secret negotiations, and a couple of speakers earlier talked about the pro forma as a public benefit, the lawyer's letter, and so on. And can I just hear again from the real estate people that there was a discussion with some representatives of the neighborhood, and the most secret possible numbers were made public, at least revealed to those people, and they were, I gather, supposed to report back or have reported out to some extent here?
That is indeed correct. We met with Ray Spaxman, BTY Group, who are providing the pro forma analysis on behalf of Ray Spaxman. We did provide them our estimates of 2008 values for sales, hard and soft costs, financing, and heritage preservation costs. So I think you will probably see, I think VTY are actually speaking later on, and that will be give you a clear understanding that we've actually provided them with a lot of information.
Okay, so we will get out in the open before we're done here. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Worship. I think much has been said about the possibly unfitness of this new design into this whole neighborhood. My question is to the staff and perhaps to the architects to help me understand. I know on the Appendix E, page 15 of 22, has described a little bit about the architectural nature and characteristic of this building. But because in the ODP it's clearly said that in order to preserve and restore a pre-1940 building and how it fits to the environment, how it fits to the nickel building. So can you explain to us and give us a little bit more information and how this architectural nature of this the townhouses, because someone earlier has said that this is a poorly designed row housing. I would like to have more information on the characteristics, architectural significance, and how it fits with the neighborhood. Yes, please. Thank you.
30 seconds, please. Just to say that I would ask that council give enough floor space so that the proponent does not have to demolish and does not have to build these massive townhouses.
Your Worship, councillors, the architectural intent here is to provide a dominant feature of the Nickel House in situ on the site. That caused us to consider our options where to put the floor space, and the floor space is most obviously destined to go on the parcel of land facing the highest density, where it would most suit. For instance, it could not go in the front yard of the Nickel House. It's completely unsuitable there. So the retention of the very majestic heritage house we have remaining in situ really applies us to the lower part of the site in order to put in the available floor space to satisfy the floor space and no more than the floor space allowed on this site cumulatively. The design of the townhouse infill projects are really inspired by many local Vancouver sites, many of them heritage. Shannon Mews, for instance, was considered, and we believe that the brick and stone features of that are well rendered into this application. As well, the Vancouver Club down on Hastings Street was seen as another excellent example of architecture that we would draw on to provide this. Right across the street, the University Women's Club is another that we looked on for architectural inspiration. And our goal was really to assist the urban design features of this site. Predominantly, once again, I'll go back to it, the dominance of the heritage house is critical. It's been retained in situ, and with many of the very large and beautiful heritage trees that are associated with it. Downhill from that is this so-called three-story building, but it's when you look at it closely, it's actually only 2 stories that's exposed to the heritage house, the third one essentially being dug into the hill. So our intention there was to reduce the impact of that as much as possible. The other Block A building, which is curving along McRae to Granville Street, is intended really to firm up the edge of the site. And you've heard from Paul Sanga, the landscape architect, on several occasions, for it to be well within and embedded within an enormous urban garden.
Would it be fair to say that although it's a new building, the appearance will look as if it is built at the same time as the heritage building? The appearance.
Well, it may or may not, but certainly we felt that a historical reference would support the intentions of the ODP.
Councillor Chow.
Your Worship, Mr. Phil Yard, thank you for coming. I have a question to ask you of your presentation. No, Mr. Phil Yard.
Councillor Chow, just 1 second. What was this, Councillor Lee?
Oh, okay, sure, sorry.
Yes. If Council permits, I'll add a few comments on why staff do support this project, and in particular the townhouse aspect from a basic planning principle.
Architecturally, I think the question was about the architectural aspect of it, so maybe
if the question is about the architectural character, I think the architect is the best person to have answered that, and I could point out a number of aspects of the siting of the townhouses which are in line with the ODP. But at this point, I think I'd like to defer to Mr. Todern.
Well, actually, sorry, Madam Clerk. I'll remind Council that although there are some conditions relative to further design development, including one, and perhaps Ms. Potter can remind me of where it is, or remind Council of where it is, which actually speaks to some further review of the architectural merits, maybe to put it more directly, the architectural styling or approach to the architectural language of the townhouse project that we've suggested to Council. Thank you, Ms. Potter. Appendix C, page 1 of 4, are the various design development conditions, and the first one says 1.1, design development to achieve the FSD, ODP, and First Shaughnessy guidelines with the exception of those. It further designed to meet the First Shaughnessy guidelines, and it says note to applicant, greater variety and distinction of facades for units in Block A should be achieved. There is further conditions relative to materials and finishes, etc. if council has specific comments regarding the architectural language, certainly we're pleased to take them and could help council craft additional design development conditions, which you occasionally do at the rezoning stage. I'll remind council, though, that this application from an architectural perspective is going to go through further review at the development permit stage. At this scale, usually the townhouse project is approved by the Director of Planning. Given the controversy and public comment regarding it, our usual practice would be to bump it to Development Permit Board. So instead of myself making the decision, it would be through the three-member Development Permit Board, and the many folks that are here would have the opportunity to come and comment on the detailed architecture and further development of the site layout and other conditions such as that. I'll say this, that the intention of the architecture, usually, to answer the councillor's question, is not to try to mimic the architectural style, not to make it look exactly like it is of the same age. Because generally speaking, the intent is to try to make buildings to be of their time, and in that way pay respect to the heritage building by not trying to make it look too much like it. But you try to sensitively, through the design, have it through materiality, etc., have some connection to the context of the buildings around it. We want the architecture to be authentic, but still pay some respect. I personally think, and Mr. Spaxman has made some comments about the architecture, etc., that there's more work to be done on a sensitive approach that meets the Shaughnessy guidelines to the architecture, but that usually gets dealt with at the DP stage.
Thank you. Councillor Deal?
Yeah, thanks. Just a brief follow-up, and thank you for that.
Your Worship?
Oh,
you're on there. Question.
Sorry, Councillor Chow.
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. York, thank you for coming. Now, you made some comments about, there could be another way to reward the developer to save the house. Can you elaborate on some of that?
Yeah. I mentioned those two buildings that are listed on the available or the heritage density exchange list, and they got $9.5 million, and the Bank of Montreal was $8.1 million. And this doesn't cost the city anything. It's used, the purchases are used in, well, one was used in a convention center in the basement, and others are usually like a 10% bonus on a 10-story building. They might get one more story. So it doesn't hurt the city, and it doesn't cost. There's no staff time involved because this exchange is done outside of the city.
So are you advocating allowing the density to go outside of the Shaughnessy area then?
To keep the heritage house, allow the developer to sell the excess density, and ask the city to give a bonus of density so that he will make the same amount as if he knocked it down and built 3 houses.
So you also mentioned that the freeze was lifted in First Shaughnessy in regard to HRA transfer as of June 2007, right? That there was a freeze on the density transfer now. So what's happening after June 2007 now? It's open that you could actually transfer it outside of First Shaughnessy? Or?
Well, council can do whatever it wants to do, and if it has put a moratorium on, it can take it off.
Okay.
And I understand that council has been quite generous with heritage buildings in giving them extra density that they can turn around and sell.
But you also make a very technical distinction here in that since the other lot is a CD1 development, so they're actually transferring it out of First Shaughnessy, because once it becomes a CD1, it's technically outside, Yes, perhaps staff could
but it
comment.
It has to be north of 16th Avenue into the central business district, the central area. It can't be into Shaughnessy, and it can't just be across the boundary.
Okay, sure, Mr.
Thank you. The speaker raises a number of issues here, and maybe I can address them in a little more detail. First of all, Council passed a resolution last July with a moratorium on all transfers of density in the city, with the exception of 5 projects in the downtown east side, which we're proceeding with. So in policy, there's a barrier there. If that policy wasn't in place, so if we're talking about prior to July of last year, the transfer of density policy as it applies in this circumstance would allow the transfer of density from one FSD site to another. And in fact, the fact that one of them is being zoned to CD1 would not be a barrier. That's a tool to implement that. So in fact, you could transfer density from one site to another. And indeed, this application is a form of transfer of density from one subdivided site to another. And in fact, it's quite a good match in terms of the intent of the transfer of density policy, in the sense that those that benefit are also close by those that are impacted. One of the issues with the Greencroft application and other suburban transfer of density proposals is that the impact of additional density is moved far away and it's impacting others. And that seemed to be, by many, as an inequity. Those that benefit, some benefit, and others further away are the ones that are impacted by it. So in fact, this application is a form of transfer of density which fits quite closely with that policy.
Okay. Councillor Deal.
Yes, thank you. My question is to staff. It has to do with the design elements. I'll keep it brief. I know that's not what we're discussing tonight. But just in terms of process, you know, I look at this and I can tell you whether I like it or not, but that's a matter of taste from someone who's not a professional in this field. The UDP, however, is, and I see that they have approved of this, but it doesn't mention the design, the specific design of the buildings. It mentions the siding, the orientation, the massing, the gardens. And I wondered if there was, and this is naivete, is there another step that the UDP will look at the design elements? Okay, I'm seeing lots of nods.
Yes, at the development
design plan
at the development permit stage, it will go back to the urban design panel and to the first Shaughnessy panel, who are used to seeing it evolve from a rezoning to a more detailed development.
That's so they'll be considering the specific design at that time. And Councillor Lee, I have to warn you not to refer to faux heritage in front of the Heritage Commission. They don't like it.
Next speaker is Beverly O'Toole, followed by Sarah Watts. Beverly O'Toole.
Mr. Mayor, Council, residents, please excuse me for my dark glasses. I've had eye surgery and I find the lights quite bright. So I'm not trying to hide behind anything. I would like to say I have been residing in First Shaughnessy since 1949. I have just left the Crescent after 42 years on the corner of the Crescent and Osler. The White House with the blue awnings, everybody knew them as. I decided to downsize my residence, and now I've gone up on the new one, and I don't know, maybe I should have stayed where I was. But after I'm listening to and seeing these pictures of what they'd like to do, I'm glad I've left the area as far as the Crescent is concerned. I think I'm so much against it. I just don't believe that this is what they want to do to First Shaughnessy. And I do agree with one of the gentlemen that spoke earlier this evening. To me, the person who has bought this property is trying to make a profit. And I think it's a shame to the beautiful properties, birds, the tranquility that our area has, to ruin it. But if you people do agree to go ahead on the prospect, I feel it's a step that somebody else will buy another large home, heritage or not, and decide they're going to put a bunch of condos on that property also. I can't believe that this is happening to our city, which to me is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I love it. I was born here. I raised my family here. And it's the entrance to Vancouver, and the middle of wherever you live in Vancouver, your Shaughnessy area is the center, north, south, east, or west. I love my city, but I'm very disappointed this evening on seeing what someone would like to do to ruin it, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Sarah Watson, followed by Ellen Coulson.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council members. I am one of the neighbours adjacent to the property subject of this application, and I lived at Highcroft Towers. I am not in support of a rezoning application. I would echo what has already been said about this property by my fellow residents, namely that the density will affect the very unique atmosphere of the area. I am not comforted by the suggestion that this is a one-off and local residents need not worry about the precedent it sets, because this type of rezoning would be difficult to replicate. City staff have been clear that each development must be considered on its merits, and any development proposal will have merit, because that is what developers do: present schemes that would allow them a profit and entice the city into approval of the scheme by giving it what it clearly wants, namely preservation of a heritage house. As what concerns me has already been said, I wish to revisit the issue of public engagement and consultation in this particular case. As a member of the public, I feel quite helpless at a public hearing where I have no resources or abilities to adequately debate the assertions made by city staff, in a situation where my advocating my position that I oppose a clear cut in townhouses will come at the expense of the preservation of Nickel House. Further, I am uncomfortable being in an adversarial position with a developer who has done everything the city has asked him to do, and who will attract the ire of his neighbours depending upon the outcome. And therein lies one of the central problems about involving the public in a contentious development such as this one, and speaks to the issue of how much consultation was appropriate. The staff report suggests that there was considerable public input, and the views of the neighbours were taken into consideration in the development stages of this rezoning application, and Ms. Potter has given details of the efforts of staff to inform the neighbourhood. Appendix J of the staff report is a relevant appendix, I believe, but it appears that as far back as November 1st, 2006, there was commitment to this particular scheme, despite some disappointment expressed by the developer himself. Before even to community workshops, apparently real estate services and the proponents, as they are described in the appendix, met in July of 2006 and were talking about not moving Nickel House at all. It is not clear to me how the community workshops were structured. There is a difference between asking people the open question of what they would like to see on the lot versus asking for their opinion on a particular development or what they would like to see given the very rigid parameters as fixed by the Heritage Commission. The staff has said they had no choice in advocating strongly to preserve the house as they were following policy which would seriously limit the effect of any public input. The developer was not originally seeking this density. He has said at these meetings that over the course of his discussions with city staff, his proposal changed completely. The public participants at the consultation clearly were skeptical of a townhouse scheme and had not bought into the proposal that the house not be moved. So how did we get here? Whose agenda has been satisfied by this process? There is an obvious disconnect here between the theory of public engagement, city policy, and the practice of it. And I would submit that when staff are dealing with a situation involving the public good, namely preservation of the house, and know that this will come at a steep price, there is a very high onus upon staff for the sake of the council and for the developer to effectively engage the public in the decision making. That members of SHPOA, which apparently was well represented at those previous meetings, come to a public hearing to vigorously oppose the application suggests a significantly flawed process. I unfortunately first heard about this development long after the rezoning application was complete, and I met with city staff member Ms. Potter, followed the developments on the Vote McRae website, and attended a town meeting a couple of weeks ago. My concerns regarding traffic and greenery have been responded to by reports commissioned after the rezoning application was completed that suggest my fears are groundless. I am not comforted by these reports because they were commissioned after the development application went in. Obviously, the advanced agenda of city staff, as city staff would have no interest in commissioning reports that would contribute to derailing a 2-year process and sabotage the relationship built with the stakeholders. I do not like what has been proposed, but I do not have the financial resources to arm myself with my own traffic analyst report to suggest this fantasy is inappropriate or raise a legitimate question of the impact of a nearby intersection and therefore the impact upon public spending. I cannot engage in arborist reports that there are alternatives here that would preserve more green space. Other residents have engaged expert opinion at considerable personal expense, and it is disheartening to me the extent to which the public must utilize its own resources to attempt to make a difference. The process of obtaining public input in the development stage failed in this case, and for that reason I'm of the view city staff should revisit the zoning application. Thank you for your time.
Ellen Paulison, followed by John Fredericks.
Your Worship, council members, and neighbors and friends. Several people have spoken in a rather broad vision against the rezoning and in support of the Shaughnessy guidelines, and I happen to agree with them. However, I want to raise a few practical concerns that I have, and those are based on my personal experiences. 25 years ago, I lived on the southwest corner of 16th and Granville, and when I lived there, the noise was an issue. That was 25 years ago. I assume it's been addressed, the noise issue has been addressed, but there's another issue that I'm not so sure if people are aware of because it's a bit more subtle. We all know that when a truck, a large truck or a bus or any heavy vehicle comes down a road, down a hill, and it has to either slow down or stop, it has to gear down. And when it gears down, there's a bit of a vibration. And when I lived on the corner of 16th and Granville, I can tell you, I knew whenever a truck or a bus was gearing down on that hill. And I don't know, maybe this vibration issue has been dealt with, but that's a concern that I have, and I would like to urge that to be checked on. My address, I'm sorry I didn't say my address. I don't even know if I said my name. My address is 1447 McRae. And I frequently travel east on 16th Avenue, and I want to turn right to go up McRae Avenue. Now, I know the city is making a big effort to remove traffic traveling at high speeds and using it as a means of routing to their homes. They're trying to discourage traffic through residential areas. So to do this, at the bottom of McRae Avenue, they've put in a fairly sharp corner. So to turn up McRae, you have to slow down to, not quite a stop, but you have to really slow down to deal with it. I also know that the traffic comes down Granville at a considerable speed, and they yield onto 16th, which turns into Marpole. I know traffic comes along 16th at a fair speed, but here I am wanting to slow down to turn up McRae. And I have to tell you, personally, I have felt kind of vulnerable a few times. So I know the traffic engineer has said last week and has said again this week that there are no requirements for traffic pattern changes. But I kind of think it's already an accident waiting to happen. I know the studies say that they did say that there isn't a lot of traffic on McRae. I'm wondering if those studies were done when there was a function at Highcroft or Christmas fair. Sometimes there is a lot of traffic on Highcroft, and I feel that this development, adding 16 townhomes, will make it a little bit worse. So I personally think that there might have to be some traffic changes to that corner, and at whose expense? The city's expense. What I didn't mention is there's also difficulty accessing this particular point. If you want to go east or downtown, you drive down the hill and go east and then down on Hemlock. If you want to go south or west, you go up the hill, or this is what I found anyway, I go up the hill onto the Crescent and then to wherever I want to go. You're adding 16 townhomes. the traffic is going to be forced to go that way. So again, the city is trying to reroute traffic onto the arterial ways. This development is on 2 major arterial ways, but to go south or west, they are forced to go into Shaughnessy. You're forcing them to go into an area which you're trying to get the traffic out of. And that doesn't make sense to me. Seems to me you should be trying to get them onto the arterial roadways, not out of them. There are 51 spots, parking spots. I haven't seen or heard anything about the trucks. And also, if there's a moving van, where do they go? Where do workmen park their trucks? I think that's a concern if it has not been addressed, and I haven't heard it being addressed. My last point, and I almost need the model to make it. My driveway, when I drive out of my driveway, I actually face the east side of the Nickel House. And when I do that, to my right there are a couple of coach houses, there's a large parking lot, and then there's the Highcroft estate, the Highcroft house. And it's a big house. The parking lot is about the same size as the house. I looked carefully at the model last week, and then I went back to my place and I checked what I'm about to see. And I actually have to question whether the Highcroft building is located properly on that model. I know it's a huge project and it's difficult to get everything exactly right, but it should be the scale, and I'm not sure that it's in the right spot. So in summary, I'm wondering if that detail is not quite correct, what other details have been missed. Thank you.
Thank you. John
Your Worship, quick question to staff regarding the previous speaker about the noise. Is there any comment regarding some reflection from concrete buildings of this new development? Because you're now living, Ms. Collison, you're now living at the southwest corner of 16th and Granville?
No, that was 25 years ago.
Oh, 25 years ago. You're at 1447 McRae. Okay.
We have had our health department, the city's Vancouver Coastal Health is a standard review group in these type of applications. They've provided their requirements, and you'll see in Appendix A, page 4 of 4 of the draft bylaw, what the project will be expected to meet from an acoustical point of view. And then, as is typical at the development permit stage, they'll be required to submit a report indicating how they're meeting it in mitigation measures.
Yes, thank you. I see that. All I'm saying is she was making a comment about noise reflection from a concrete building. When the truck comes down Granville Street and stop at the stoplight, and it generates vibrations. That's what your point. I was just curious as to any technical comments on that. No.
I wouldn't have any on the vibrations. We do look at the noise issue, though, to make sure that the units are livable.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Your Worship, City Councilors. My name is John Frederickson. I live at 1443 McRae, and I'm also representing Muriel Morris at 1453 McRae and Graham Dawson at 1459 McRae. We oppose the development for many of the reasons that have already been discussed, but a major concern not discussed much until Alan Collison spoke is the existing traffic flow onto and off the north end of McRae Avenue, made dangerous by the convergence of fast and heavy traffic originating from Granville Street, 16th Avenue, and Marpole, and how the problem would be compounded by the new development housing 51 spaces for cars along with the flow of service vehicles coming and going. And these service vehicles have not been addressed, and it's an important question, and my wife did ask the question when she attended one of these early meetings, and they didn't have an answer at that time, and the answer wasn't forthcoming from that time forward. The traffic entering and exiting McRae Avenue at Marpole is made even more hazardous in the winter with snow and ice because of the steepness of the McRae Avenue hill. As a consequence, the police have had to close McRae Avenue on occasion. And there have been, of course, cars skidding and sliding, and they have in fact collided with cars parked on the east side of McRae Avenue. The parked cars give unsuspecting drivers very little room to maneuver when skidding occurs. Converging cars can enter or exit McRae Avenue at Marpole from four lanes. That is, cars traveling north on McRae or west on Marpole, cars crossing Granville and traveling east on Marpole, and finally cars turning east off Granville onto Marpole. The latter are supposed to yield to other traffic, but they often don't. And I wouldn't doubt that there have been fender benders there. I understand that the corner or the intersection of 16th and Granville is one of the busiest in Vancouver. The convergence of cars is made more difficult due to the hairpin turn required to enter McRae off Marpole while heading east. But if this development goes forward in some sort of form, I think there should be some things done as far as the traffic is concerned. And I have about 3 suggestions. One is to prohibit all parking on McRae Avenue. 2 is to prevent cars traveling west on Marpole Avenue from turning left onto McRae. And 3 is to widen the McRae Avenue entrance off Marpole by eliminating the hairpin turn. I'd also like to know who's going to pay for this, if it's necessary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael Rolburn, and I think that will probably be our last speaker. Michael Rolburn.
I live in First Shaughnessy on the other side of Granville. I live in First Shaughnessy on the other side of Granville, and I'm opposed to this rezoning. We are told that only 11 townhouses may be enough to compensate the owner for preserving the heritage house. In that case, only 5 or 6 detached units would be all that is needed. That would eliminate the need for rezoning and would protect the heritage character of First Shaughnessy. This option has not been adequately explored, nor do other means of compensating the owner seem to have been seriously considered. This project is contrary to the city's own heritage policy, which says all development in First Shaughnessy must strive to preserve the estate-like quality of large properties and the existing appearance of the streetscape. This project destroys the existing streetscape as seen from both Granville Street and McRae Avenue. The First Shaughnessy Official Development Plan, which is the bylaw for First Shaughnessy, encourages moderate increases in density. It allows conversion of large houses into a few dwelling units and also permits construction of additional houses called infills on large lots. It does not allow building townhouses or apartment blocks in this heritage area. The Nicol House is heritage and it is worth preserving, but the price which this council is asked to pay for its protection, damage to the streetscape, is too high. The Crescent is the heart of First Shaughnessy. The house is much too far from it, almost 180 feet from the lot line. The street will look better if Nicol House is brought closer. This house was built where it is now to provide an exceptional view of English Bay and the North Shore Mountains for the owner. That view is not there anymore, but the house remains standing where perhaps it should not have been built. The applicant originally wanted to move the house closer to the Crescent in line with the other houses and to build a number of stand-alone units. This plan would have been in keeping with the First Shaughnessy bylaw with no need for rezoning. It would have protected heritage. Unhappily, this plan was abandoned during the co-design process. The proposal before you will save the house, but it will leave it in the wrong place. The 11 townhouses do not belong on this visually important corner, and the block of 5 townhouses is distressingly close to the heritage house. In my opinion, the damage with this current proposal will cause to First Shaughnessy's heritage may outweigh the benefit of retaining Nicholl House. I respectfully ask this Council to reject the rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, that's all for speakers for tonight. So this meeting is recessed to Monday, March 10th at 7:30 p.m. in the Council chambers. And I would like to remind the Council members it's very important that you do not engage in any discussion or correspondence in regard to this matter.